Sentinel mindset.
If you're a police officer who is about to retire, or maybe you want to have an early retirement because you want to get into the world of executive protection, this is an episode you don't want to miss. In fact, if you're someone that just wants to get into executive protection, we're going to be talking about a lot of things here that can help you navigate and get ready for this incredibly rewarding career. Today, I have with me a very special guest. I have a fellow Canadian, Justin Hanson, all the way from Edmonton, and he is the CEO of Spec VIP Protection Group. And who are they? They are basically focused on a unique and specialized training for the VIP, close protection, the whole 9 yards. Justin, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, Constantine. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Amazing, man. I'm really happy, Justin, that we're talking about this topic today. It all started back in Nashville in December when we went to the International Protectors Conference, which I always recommend people to go to. Maybe that can be one of your little side links in there. But we were sitting together talking about, just the amount of people that are, getting exposed to this industry. And we said, hey, wouldn't this be a good opportunity to talk about this?
Yeah, 100%. And it was a great conversation. It was a great conference. I completely agree with you. That's one of my regular recommendations to folks is regardless of your background or where you come from, what you do, you've got to be at that close protection conference because, this conversation is born out of the networking and the content and everything that happened there and our past experiences, and that's how you make stuff happen. So,
amazing.
Yeah, super excited to have this conversation.
Okay, good. So before we actually just jump into the nitty gritty, you know how this industry is, Justin. Who is Justin Hanson? Who gives him the right to talk and all this kind of stuff that people talk about all the time? Let me ask you, first of all, just so people can really understand, I know what Spec VIP is, but no one better to sell it than yourself. What exactly does Spec VIP do for the executive protection community?
Yeah, so at Spec VIP, we do a few different things, and it's kind of organic. So, I've got a background in public service, a background in executive protection. When I started the company, I kind of had two defining objectives. One was to help people in the protection industry, be better, be more successful, have more skill set and things like that. And then also to take things from the industry and help other people that maybe aren't protectors. So we kind of have two approaches, helping people in the industry and using what we know to help others, be better protected. And so Spec VIP, when it comes to helping develop people, we do a variety of different things. A big emphasis on what we do is training. We focus on a variety of different training. We have in-person training, we have online training, we have mentoring and coaching sessions. And things like that. But we also help folks, develop programs for executive protection or just protection gaps that they might have in their organizational portfolios or individually. It's a big part of what I do personally is help individuals either enter into the industry or elevate their current capability that are already in the industry. And that's a pretty big emphasis on our focus is helping people be more successful operationally and in their careers.
Okay, amazing. And Justin, I know people that have done your physical course. They've come down and have provided rave reviews, and we've sent people your way as well. So we definitely know that what you're putting out there is tried and tested. And also, I think it's also very more fundamentally sound. I know there's a lot of agencies around the world. You can go as extreme as having a lot of hard skills and you're flipping around in vehicles and you're doing all that. But the reality is a lot of the stuff that you do is kind of like what is the fundamentals of what really is the average of what a close protection agent will do. Meaning as in, if you're doing CP work, EP work in Canada, well, for those in the US, we cannot carry guns as an agent. So why train for that, for example, in Canada? You know what I mean?
So, it's interesting that you mentioned that, and the conversation comes up quite a bit. In fact, I often get requests from, U.S. Companies that are coming here to do work, and they're looking for people and generally we provide them because people have taken our training program. We give them recommendations, and that's one thing that comes up a lot is, firearms. I like firearms. I think they're useful They're definitely valuable from a protective lens. But if you legally can't carry them, then there's no point really on training them for them, other than personal interest or having an awareness of firearms. Right. One of the things that I talk about in a lot of our trainings, you can't protect against threats that you know exist.
Mm-hmm.
So the more familiar you are with the threat, whether it be firearms, physical, or anything else, the better you're going to be able to understand the parameters of the threat and then how to protect against it. Right. I spent some time years ago in Mexico. I was on a vacation, and we ended up having a significant hurricane come in, and we ended up stranded basically at our resort for several days, and then several days after the hurricane. And I can tell you, I got a firsthand knowledge of that threat. And being from Edmonton, we don't deal with a lot of hurricanes here,
Right, right,
so it's not something I have a lot of personal exposure to. But I
right.
got some great personal exposure to that and to hurricanes, and so that is a story I often bring into discussions around executive protection when we're talking about travel, and things like of that nature. So when we're talking about firearms, in the private sector in Canada, we can't carry firearms. In other jurisdictions, in the United States, for example, you absolutely can. And so you definitely need to have a fundamental working knowledge, and a high level skill set of how to carry that firearm in the capacity of the equipment and the threat landscape, but also understanding how that piece of equipment works into the executive protection world. So when you talk about the fundamentals, you need to understand all of those, the fundamentals of advances, close protection, reaction to attack, risk assessments, everything that comes from being a well-trained executive protection professional. And then you also have to understand it in the concept of your operation. So if you're a solo practitioner, it's going to be a little bit different than if you're on a 3, 5, or 20 person team. And so just that mere concept of adding a firearm into the mix of the discussion changes the parameters of the operation. And so, when we're talking about the concept of police officers transitioning to the executive protection world, if I'm a Canadian police officer or an American police officer or any police officer, I've carried a firearm for my entire career. A significant amount of the things that have been developed in my skill set have been based around that firearm. It's been based around my response capability, and even just the holster and the uniform and all of the things that come from carrying a firearm. That's embedded into my capabilities. But then now I'm finding myself in a different world, a new environment, new skill set, new missions and purpose and things like that, new jurisdictions. I need to make sure that I have trained myself and developed myself individually, and if I'm working as a team collectively, to be able to handle myself appropriately in those situations based on the new circumstances and not my past skills. So that's a big part of, just talking about firearms. That's
Yeah.
a big can of worms right there, opening up to the discussion around executive protection fundamentals,
Yes, yes.
and being a functional, executive protection
Yeah,
professional.
yeah, no, 100%. And look, that could be, as you said, a segment on its own, just on its own. Because like us, we get regular requests from our U.S. clientele or existing and new. We need a couple of armed agents, and then when you tell them, we don't have them, that's when their jaws drop. Like they can't almost comprehend it. It's like, what? How does that make sense? It doesn't. So it's always an educational piece. But what's a good transitional thing here is to talk about what we want to share today is the transition from people that are wanting to go from policing into executive protection. Now, I think one of the very first things that I think is something that many Canadian law enforcement and those again that are just hearing this today want to get in the world as well. We are not like the U.S., which means that the executive protection world in Canada does not provide an abundance of full-time, ongoing work 365 days a year. It's usually, we're Canada. We don't really need it. However, Justin, with that said, ever since that insurance CEO that was killed last year, it has now started to kind of raise the questions, like saying, wait a second, should we be providing, executive protection to our CEOs. And I think there has been an increase that we have seen, at least, since that has happened. Any thoughts on that about protection compared to the U.S. and from a requirement perspective?
Yeah, so it's an interesting topic, and it's a conversation I've had a lot with folks lately. And you're right, there are differences in the market in Canada and the U.S. And I think that's one of the biggest differences, other than the firearms piece, is the size and scale of the market, right? I mean, they're just a much larger country. They have a much larger population, and so there's, because of that, the more people you have, the more threats you're going to have, especially from human-induced violence. So and then you also have a lot more capabilities, right? There's the more people you have, if the budgets allow for it, then you can have more people. So, on a one-for-one basis, we're not the same. But on the evolution of the threat landscape situation, we're in a very similar situation. And I find a lot of people in Canada, especially, take the absence or the presence of regular threats for granted because they don't see it, but it exists. And the let's say a per capita basis, we might not have the exact same quantity, but the variety is still going to be there, right? We're still dealing with stalking situations. We're dealing with, assaults. We're dealing with, physical and digital harassment. We're dealing with assassination, threats. Maybe not as can't think of any right now of any specific incidences that comes to mind in recent history. We've had, a few, right? The kidnappings, there's lots of incidents that don't always make the news, or if they do, they don't get a lot of exposure of CEOs and things like that being kidnapped. So from a threat landscape perspective, all of them still exist here in Canada, just maybe not at the same size and scale as they do in the US. And they're not necessarily as predominant, or if they do, they seem to be forgotten fairly quickly. We've even had our own terrorist attacks throughout Canada, terrorist threats and things like that. So the threat exists, and that incident that you mentioned, that sparked a lot of conversation. That sparked a lot of people looking at their protective efforts and creating the conversation of what's our risk and how do we mitigate that? How do we address the risk? Do we have the same risk? So I'm happy that more people are having those conversations. I'm not happy that the threat landscape is evolving as much as it is, and that we have to go that route. But I'm happy people are looking at it, especially in Canada. We're getting kind of out of that, complacency silo, and realizing that we have those types of threats here, and that we need to do something about it.
Okay,
And
no, for sure. And the thing, Justin, I guess really what I want to kind of really hit the nail on is that if I'm someone that is currently working as a police officer and I'm looking at jumping into this career, I think one of the first questions that has come up actually is, can you get full-time work? Now, I'll give you an example. Our agency right now provides executive protection. We have a couple of details right now that are basically have been going on for months, and we're basically have a setup right now where we got at least 14 full-time agents right now that are working on specific details. Now, I can tell you that's not normal. That from our experience, that's not normal to happen, right? At any given moment, it can be like, okay, we're done right now. We've always experienced ad hoc close protection requests to come in. I need a couple of days here, or the film festivals, or we got a celebrity, we got to film it. It's never ongoing. So, based on what you know as well and what you have on the west side of Canada, would you say, Justin, that for someone looking to come into this, would you say it's safe to say that if you're used to working a 9-to-5 aspect of full-time work, that's not going to be your experience working close protection if you're going to retire to go into this world?
Yeah, so generally executive protection, close protection work, it's not 9-to-5 work. So that's a pretty big expectation that you should address before you enter the industry.
Right.
Is the VIP's job is to do their job, to live their life, be a VIP, and the protector's job is to let them do it, and protect them while they do it, essentially, right? And so we got to make sure that anybody, police transitioning into this world, they understand the value, or they understand what they're getting into.
Right.
And that there are, it's now that's the benefit of being in policing, is it's not a 9 to 5 job.
Right.
So I think that's an easy transition. But yeah, it's the hours are there. You're following somebody around for their life. You're going ahead of them, making sure everything's squared away. And so that is a pretty critical thing you have to know going into. But to your point, and I'm glad to hear that you're having that much business and you're seeing that growth, because that's what I'm seeing too. I've been involved in this industry for a very long time. I have never seen this many opportunities in the Canadian market before. And I think that incident you mentioned, plus a bunch of other ones that we had in 2024, just created a bit of a steamroller effect. I'm seeing the same thing. Requests for training have gone through the roof for me, and program development and things like that are growing. And so yeah, there wasn't a lot of historically well-known full-time positions in the private sector in Canada in the past. There's been some, and there are pockets of them, especially in certain markets. The major markets in Canada definitely have had full-time corporate teams. Out here in the West, we've had a bit of a roller coaster of ups and downs with the oil industry, and the oil industry drove a lot of close protection activity, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then there was a bit of a dip, as the market turned and people moved their headquarters away or reevaluated their approach to business. So we saw a drop in the close protection specific aspects of full-time, corporate jobs. But when that dropped, we started to see, kind of those ones that you're talking about, the VIP visits, the short-term stuff on the corporate side, celebrities, all of those different sectors. We saw a lot of visits, and then obviously the pandemic hit, that caused a big drop. And unfortunately, there was a lot of protectors that really had to learn to do some new business and pivot essentially. We got out of the pandemic, and 2024 was a significant amount of growth I saw in the industry from my perspective. And 2025 is looking like it's even going to be greater. I don't anticipate that's going away.
I agree. I agree. So one of the things that, again, the focus in here is people that are currently in policing. A lot of people, Justin, this is going to be a good segue into this right now, because I know you guys have been waiting. How do you transition? I'll tell you right now. Not everyone understands what the role of executive protection does. Policing and executive protection are completely opposite of each other. And I think a lot of times people are thinking, well, I've heard people say, well, I'm a police officer. I can easily do the job. And at the end of the day, like, I'm pretty sure everyone knows that there's pretty good police out there, and there's also some bad police out there. And I'm not talking about like ethics. I'm talking about like skills and are you good at your job and stuff. But it is a very different skill set. Let me give you a very quick story. In early days when we were first getting CP assignments, we hired an individual who, literally told me that he had done a little bit of training in close protection. And I said, what exactly was that? And he did some online courses. And I said, okay, he seemed to have a really good track record with the police service. And I said, let me give him a shot. And I always think it's good to, put these problems up in the public, because at the end of the day, we learned from this years ago, and it's kind of also one of the smaller things, but it could have been a bigger thing. Anyways, he went to the environment, and it was required an advance, of course, and it required for him to do a lot of pre-planning. And when he ended up showing up to the actual detail, he came in dressed very casually when the requirement was to be done in a suit, for example. Okay. And that was frowned upon by the client. But it was a small thing that could have turned into a very big thing. And that is because in their minds, it was like, well, look, when I was doing this, that's all we did. We just kind of showed up doing it like this. And they're not understanding there's so many layers to this. Again, it's like it's a brand new profession. So I know you told me this, Justin, that you wrote an article as of late. By the way, do you want me referencing this?
Sure. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah,
It's still in draft form, and I can explain why. But
no, for sure.
yeah.
But you put together, and I read it, and it was fantastic. It was an entire article about how to transition from policing to executive protection. And like, I think it's important that people understand if they're going to walk into this industry, it's a very competitive industry. And if you're going to be selected to make sure that, you give the agency peace of mind that you know what you're doing, you have to demonstrate certain competencies, right? Do you want to touch on a little bit about that? Maybe even from some experiences of yourself about how the transition can look to take place, meaning as in that they're two polar opposites?
Yeah. So, I mean, every job has, core fundamentals and capabilities. And I think one of the best correlations that I've experienced recently is not just executive protection, but like in any job, you start out as an individual. And then if you stick around for a while and you have the skills and the competencies, you might get promoted. And if you get promoted a few times, all of that past knowledge is extremely beneficial. But at each job, you're applying it differently than you did in the previous role. And so a police sergeant absolutely has to have police experience to be a police sergeant. A police manager, same thing. But the way they apply that knowledge at each role or each rank level is going to be a little bit different, right? And the same thing applies to executive protection, even within the policing context. So if you go from a traditional patrol task or specialty unit and you find yourself even internally going into a close protection type function, it's going to be a completely different duty. So right off the bat, you need some specialized knowledge, skills, and abilities to be able to function in that new role, just like as a leader does in those new roles. So the best way to get there is through training, through experience, through mentoring and coaching with people that know how to do that. Mm-hmm. Take that complete package, and now you go from the public sector to the private sector, where the operating environment, the corporate ecosystem, everything is completely different. And you throw on the nuances of a VIP. I built a presentation several years ago that was kind of the introductory presentation to my mentoring and coaching sessions and training that I do, and it's called the VIP Scopes Everything. Because you can have all this understanding of fundamentals. You can have all of these, the fancy equipment and great training and an exceptional team. But if you don't understand the VIP's mission and how they influence that, you're not going to be successful, mm-hmm. right? And it could be as simple as how close do they want you to stand next to them. And so there are so many nuances with being not executive protection person, but a successful one, mm-hmm. one that is able to perform at a high standard within all of the things that influence them, whether it be the threat, the environment, the situation that they're in, and the VIP, plus their own capabilities.
Yeah.
So police officers bring a significant amount of useful experience to that equation, but they also need to recognize that it is a completely different job. And it requires different skill sets, different knowledge, and a different approach to applying things that they might have done before.
Absolutely.
And just a personal, go ahead.
It's a world. It's an. I mean, I'll give you an example. I remember one time I was talking to an agent, and he was saying that his VIP asked him to go get a coffee. Can you go get me a coffee? And he did it begrudgingly, but he said, "What am I, his servant? I'm gonna go get him a coffee." I'm like, hey. If you want to be part of this world, that may come in. And his thing was like, it made sense. Well, if I leave to go get him a coffee, who's protecting him, right? But at the end of the day, these are like the nuances of learning about a world. It's not just about like, what's kind of like in theory, but it's also about just dealing with people and knowing how to navigate around them.
Yeah, that's a great story. And that scenario comes up quite a bit with a variety of different things. Can you go get me a coffee? Can you go get my dry cleaning?
Yeah.
Can you, carry my luggage? Things like that. And at the end of the day, the pushback from the protector is, you know what? That's not my job. I'm not an assistant. And in the public sector, you might be able to get away with that. But the private sector, if you say no to something, it's likely what I refer to in training sometime as last day stuff.
Yeah.
That could be a last day item, right?
Right.
But on the flip side too, is I like to take a risk-based approach to certain things. So let's say, for example, my VIP is at home at their house or in their office, and they say, "Can you go get me a coffee?" Okay, well, there's a few different ways I can do that. But let's say, for example, I leave and go get the coffee. Uh, I didn't expose them to any extra risk by going from a non-public place to a public location.
Hmm.
So my B, by myself doing that, I have reduced their risk anyway. Have I
Hmm.
opened them up to other risk? Sure, because if I'm not there and I'm the only protector, which is not a great model, but is
Right.
better than nothing.
Right.
If I leave them alone, then yeah, if there's a, from anything as minimal to a fire alarm in the building to a, somebody causing a disturbance to as, high a threat as a active shooter or terrorist attack or something. Yeah, I've left them vulnerable.
Okay.
So it's always a balancing act. And if I've got a team of, 3 or 6 or 10 people, or there's, some site security that's got some training that understands protection well, then am I really reducing or am I really creating more risk by leaving to go get the coffee or the dry cleaning?
Right.
Every time you do something, that creates a potential for it to be a standard. And so, it can become expected all the time. So now by doing that, have we created future risk?
Yes.
Right? If they expect me to always get their coffee and always get their dry cleaning, does this become a window and a routine that could create a threat actor or open another vulnerability for a threat actor to recognize a new routine and plan some attacks? So again, it speaks to the complexity of executive protection.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, if the boss says, "Hey, can you go get me a coffee?" Well, your job, again, going back to leadership, is to
Yes.
facilitate coffee arriving.
Yeah.
So maybe you're not the one who does it. Maybe you call,
Uber.
one of these coffee services
Yeah.
or ask
Yeah.
a staff member to go get it. So there's lots of ways to
Yeah.
solve that problem.
For
At the
sure.
end of the day, I think the most important thing is it's your problem to solve because they put it in your lap. And
Yeah.
you need to make sure that in that equation, you don't create more vulnerabilities or open yourself, the VIP, up to more risk.
Good. 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 So, as a starting point, what would you suggest here, Justin? If someone is saying, "Look, Justin, I'm going to retire soon. I want to be guided. What should I be doing right now to help me? I retire in 2 years' time from now. I plan on diving into this world. What's my starting steps?"
Yeah. So 2 years is a good time frame. I like to recommend a minimum of 1 to 2 years. Start planning and actually preparing for your departure. And if you can do it even before that, like around the 5 year mark, that could even be better. So things that you should start doing is first make that decision, right? So you've decided that, I want to get into executive protection. Maybe I want to learn a little bit more about it. Make sure I know what I'm getting into, the lifestyle, the opportunities. Is there a market for it where I'm living? Because if there's no market or the market is different than what your expectations are, then there's no point in essentially doing all that work ahead of time.
Hmm.
Or more importantly, knowing what the market is, knowing what the opportunities are, you can focus your efforts in that direction because if you're dealing with a corporate market versus a celebrity market, there might be some nuances that you need to look at differently. But the reality is, make the decision and then start doing the work. And the work becomes, knowledge, training, and experience is kind of the backbone of development in a lot of sectors. I like to add in network. So, focus on those 4 pillars of success: knowledge, training, experience, and network. So build yourself a LinkedIn profile. Make sure it complies with, your organization's policies and any kind of social expectations as well too, because you see that a lot in the policing sector is, there could be some issues there. And then start networking with people. Figure out where the executive protection community is hanging out in your area. Maybe there's conferences. ACES has chapters all over the world, and they're a good place to start to get an idea of the corporate world. We talked about it at the beginning, the IPSB Close Protection Conference. you know, create a LinkedIn profile, follow them, start following the posts that they make and the people that are making them and liking them. I would suggest start connecting to that network, because the network is really what's going to guide you if you select it appropriately, right? If you, they often say we are a product of the five people that we surround ourselves.
Mm.
Well, if you want to be successful in executive protection, when you leave policing, then before you leave, you should surround yourself with at least 5 to 10 industry leaders that have been successful in the past, because there's a lot of risk out there with surrounding yourself with the wrong people and the wrong networks.
No, that's good.
And so those conferences are good. The Board of Executive Protection Professionals is another one that they run a conference in June that's quite popular. And any of those professional bodies that are putting out information and running events, networking events. My company has run some networking events. They've been quite successful. And like even right now, the last one I ran, I think, was in early in 2024, and there's people still getting opportunities from the connections that were made there. So,
Oh, they're
things,
huge.
any kind of local networking event is huge, and of course training, because like training is going to give you the knowledge, it's going to give you the skills, and it's going to give you access to people that are already in the network, both the instructors or the organizations running them, and even the students. I've had people show up on my training courses, and they're networking on the breaks, they're talking to each other, and then somebody in the course gets a call that they've got a task on Monday, and they're like, "Hey, I need some people to help support me on Monday." So people get work right in the course. Now that's not always the case, of
Yes,
course,
yes.
but the the point is the network, right? And the getting focused or access to a focused network that's going to give you uh, opportunities, but also is going to help you to develop yourself through those professional conversations and things like that. And somebody you can pick up the phone or send a message to when you have a question about something.
No, that's good. I like how you said the timeline of 2 to 5 years, and I'll tell you why. So a lot of courses that are offered worldwide, usually could be anywhere from like an introduction of a day to maybe even a couple of days, 4 or 5. And then you can do some pretty intense ones that can go like 20, 30 days, for example. Now, here's the thing. The average person does not do 20, 30 days of training, of intense training. They're usually doing anything that's between 1 and 5 days. And the thing is that they need to understand that just because you've done this 1 to 5 day training session is not going to open up doors for you now to start jumping into the world, because you've just been exposed to it, right? So when you allow 2 to 5 years, that's also to allow ample training. And then people will start to give you an opportunity, maybe on a very small detail that's maybe 3 or 4 person team, or maybe they'll give you like something that's on a higher level, but it's not direct close protection. So you can kind of get the confidence and, the mannerisms and the nicks and knacks to kind of help you navigate around those things that's going to make you a good agent. What would you suggest, Justin? Because I know it's one of those questions that I've seen so many people say, I just did my 2-day course. How come I'm not doing work? You know what I mean? What's your thoughts on timelines? Like, meaning as in like what you're learning as an ongoing game.
So timeline is there's never an end to the timeline.
Yeah.
I'm still learning every day in this industry. Been coming up on 28 years here pretty soon as a professional protector, and
Mhm.
I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly doing my own gap analysis and developing around. And I think that's an important key, is that we identify our own gaps and develop the things we need to do, and instead of necessarily the things we want to do, right? Because some people will often continuously train on the things that they like to do, but it's more important that we have a robust portfolio. So, and it's a really good point you make about the courses. So a lot of people think they take a course, 2 days, 10 days, 50 days, check in the box, and they're going to be handed opportunities immediately after that. Well,
Right.
the reality is that that's not the case. And I don't know if that's the case in many industries, even especially ours,
Yeah.
because learning is a process, right? So I've been heavily involved in training for many years. And a lot of people think that taking training gives them all the answers. The reality is we need to reframe it. Training is the opportunity to ask the right questions, to learn what we don't need to know. So
Mm-hmm.
when I went through my first executive protection course, I had a little bit of experience in it through the private sector years ago, but then also through some military experience as well. But I hadn't actually gotten any formal training, just kind of been involved in it a little bit. And I took this course, and so it was kind of like midway between my career, and I wasn't learning a lot of new skills. We did some defensive tactics stuff. I taught defensive tactics for 10 years, so it was some different approaches that I hadn't seen before. So that was new. But what had changed was my understanding of purpose, the mission of executive protection, and where those skills that I had in the past fell into my ability to accomplish this task. So even little things like, in the military, we teach navigation. Navigation is extremely critical in the military, but it's about, advancing to an objective or something along
Yeah,
those lines,
yeah,
right? As opposed to the way we do it in EP, which is similar to advancing to an objective, but not the same concept. But the more I understood and had that background in navigation, the more it helped me when I traveled internationally. And the place I learned the value of that was on an EP course when I was, having to think about pre-planning routes and pre-planning, emergency response evacuation procedures. If this goes bad, how do I go to that? And a lot of people rely on technology for that, but at that time we were kind of, in this in between phase of what can technology do for us, and
right.
and what can we do with it as opposed to just relying on it. And it's still today. I mean, we should not be heavily relying on technology. So
Mm-hmm.
for a police officer going on an executive protection course is extremely valuable to just being able to self-reflect on the skills that you have. How can I adjust them to this new mission? And then where are my gaps? What am I missing? I've got a ton of experience that is going to be super valuable in this new career. And these trainers are showing me every day what's super necessary. What am I missing?
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you that mindset thing is probably one of the most important things. I trained a lot of police officers over the years, showing up on courses in a variety of different ways in this executive protection world. The biggest thing that I see that they struggle with at the beginning with is going away from the fight as opposed to going to the fight.
Mm.
They've been conditioned from the moment, I would even suggest the moment before they joined policing, that they want to help people. And the best way to do that is to get there and help people. And there's nothing wrong with that. We
Right.
need cops to be able to get to the fight as quickly as possible, whatever it is, de-escalate, do mediation, interject, and solve that problem. But in executive protection, it's all about avoidance. It's all about not being there. And so that's a big switch for a lot of people to flick, is how do I go from being the guy going to the fight to going away from the fight?
It's
And
your
I had
it's
this conversation with a student the other day who went through one of our courses a few years ago, and he's like, man, I was so close to quitting halfway through the course because I couldn't reconcile with that. And I said, well, at least you recognize that. I'm glad you made it through, and I'm glad you're self-aware enough to be able to understand the difference. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a great point. And let's look at last year as well, when before he was the president, President Trump, when he was giving that speech, and there was the assassination attempt. And if you look at his Secret Service, like, there could have been a lot of people getting trampled, potentially even getting killed. They don't care. Their focus is President Trump and President Trump only. All their focus is get him out of the X, get him to a safe zone, right? And to your point, it is a very different style of thinking, right? You're not going in to fight and protect. You're trying to protect them by kind of shielding him and getting him out of the fire. So I think that's a big piece that people need to understand. It's where the worlds are very different. And also, to your point, Justin, I mean, I'll give you a little analogy here. Even though police have a lot of fun, a good foundation for this world, it'd be the equivalent of, like, I love when I see a person playing like an acoustic guitar, like a rock and roll, if you think like Thunderstruck by AC/DC, you hear that solo. I've gone a couple of times to go get lessons, so I can learn how to play. And I have to say that after 4 or 5 lessons, maybe even 10, 15, I can't even come close to playing that solo. And if you tie those analogies into the world of, again, post-protection, executive protection, you do a couple of courses. That does not make you a pro. As you said so humbly, I still have so much to learn, and you're learning all the time. You've been doing it for a very long time, and I share that same sentiment. There's so much nuances to learn about this industry. It's just one of those things that if you're going to dive into it, you gotta go all in, and you gotta give yourself time to grow and really give it your all if that's what you want to make it.
Yeah, and you got to be realistic as well too, right? Because I mean, I'm a training person, right?
Yeah.
So I say, the answer is take all the training courses, especially from my company. But people have budgets, people have time. Like everything we do is an investment, right?
Yeah.
Our time is an investment, and so we need to make sure that we're developing ourselves in a manner that fits within the reality of our budgets and our time available,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you want to be able to, when you leave policing, you want to be able to hit the ground running.
Mm.
So don't start the day you leave preparing for that. Start as soon as possible.
Right.
And so the training, like I said, is creates that mindset shift. It gives you the foundational knowledge, right? If you've never heard what an advance is, it'll teach you what an advance is, site surveys, reaction to attack specifics. And so you get the fundamentals, you get the framework. And then after that, now it's something you've learned, and you can learn while you're doing certain things.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking your family out for dinner, and if you've got the foundational knowledge, that could be a training requirement, like a training rep, because you know what an advance is, what the fundamentals are, and some of them you probably already factored in through your own officer safety and self-protection
Mm-hmm.
on the job. But now you're starting to shift, like your family is your VIP. So
Right.
you take all of the things that you've learned in the protection training and your past experience and say, how can I apply that to protecting my family? Then now you're going through training iterations that aren't costing you money, and are reinforcing those skill sets and preparing you for when you leave. And
Yeah.
it'll also help identify, again, going back to that gap analysis, what's missing from my portfolio. Police officers often bring a significant driving skill to them. So maybe that's an element of their portfolio that they don't necessarily
Mm-hmm.
need as much. They might have some experience with medical calls, but maybe not to the same degree as they're going to be required if there isn't an ambulance or a medical service readily available, or the decision-making process around, do I stay and wait for an ambulance, or do I self-evacuate and extract to a medical facility? And that alone could be a significant element. So the piece that's missing from that is, by practicing these repetitions with your family or with your friends or what have you,
Yes.
is access to a mentor or coach, right? That is the one piece that is missing when you are self-training, essentially. But at least you've got the framework. And if you have a mentor or a coach that you can reach out to, or an opportunity to refine those things, then you can just build off of that. And your analogy about the music is fantastic, because I often, if you look at like martial arts, you don't get a black belt in jiu-jitsu by going to a 5-day 40-hour course.
Yeah, exactly.
You get it, an hour, 90 minutes a day, 3 to 5 days a week,
Mm-hmm.
over 5, 10, 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
So all learning happens incrementally, right? The more you compress it into an area, a short time frame, the harder it's going to be to retain. I have a instructor colleague that has a great saying, and he says, the best way to teach people nothing is to try and teach them everything at once.
Mm.
Right? So if you try and teach people 1,000 different things in a very short time period, they might remember 20 to 30% of it.
Yeah.
You try and teach them 100 things in that time period, they might remember 70% of it. So we need to make sure that we're developing ourselves realistically.
No, that's
so
good.
When you have that 2 to 5 years to develop, then you have made that shift and you have developed yourself incrementally over that time. Now, I'm not saying take one course and be one and done, and then 5 years, down the road, step out and go, everybody hand me a great new job, right? That there, it has to be a process over that time period. Take one fundamentals course, attend a networking event, go to, a webinar, attend conferences, attend meetups, all of these things, read a book. Like the amount of knowledge that I've gotten from reading books is fantastic, but then I don't end it there. I, I internalize the knowledge, and then I'll go to a group of other professionals and say, hey, I just read this book. Have you read it? Yeah, let's talk about it. Because as soon as we have that conversation about the topics, we are reinforcing the learning. We own it. If I say it, I own it. So if I say, hey, I just read this great book by so and so, and they were talking about, this new technique for advances. Have you heard it? Yeah, I read that too, and I had the same question. Well, let's talk it out. What's the risk? What's the reward? What's the benefits? How does this apply in my situation?
Yeah.
Well, guess what we just did? We learned about it, and then we have that framework to apply it in different situations. And that is so beneficial because when we leave our department and go into the private sector is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's different every day.
Yes.
Right? Every client is different. Every client's situation is different. We draw on all our past experiences to accomplish the goal and the experience that we're in right now. But this experience that we have today is probably nowhere near or not the exact same as every past experience.
No, that's good. That's really good, Justin. And when you touched upon the network aspect, which I want to, before I get into that, right, before we close, I want to talk about, I want to just put this out for those that are listening, our U.S. audience. They might be listening. What do you mean life after policing? I'm a current police officer now, and I'm doing close protection. So the rules in the U.S. are very different with Canada. In Canada, it is a complete conflict of interest to be a police officer and to work with a security guard license, which gives you the ability to do close protection. So I want to just throw it out there right away so people can think that's our rules in Canada. I actually had a client of ours that said, hey, listen, we need some armed guards. And I'm like, oh, we can't do that because we can't carry. He goes, just get me a couple of police officers. They'll come in. I go, no, they can't do it. It's conflict of interest, right? So again, I'm just throwing that out there. But you talked about network. I recently had on our show, we actually had the pleasure of watching Scott Lowther, who was also Canadian from Alberta, who is now the chief of security for the Lucas family at Skywalker Ranch. And how he got his opportunity was completely what you brought up, by networking. Someone said, Scott, you'd be great for this opportunity. You should apply. And that was in a setting that he was in that kind of gave him that. So I think, Justin, when you're saying these things like training, being around people, these are all things that will help you get closer to there. Because again, the more you know about the industry, the community, networking is massive. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that was a great story. And that was a great presentation, by the way.
It was.
I really enjoyed Scott's presentation. And I have to say that I was really glad that he shared that presentation, because in this industry, a lot of folks, we don't get a lot of opportunity to learn those experiences,
right,
because of the confidentiality nature of the job. And so for Scott to take that risk and get the permissions he did and share what he was able to share was fantastic. But you're absolutely right. The network is probably the most critical component to success in this industry. And going back to kind of what we talked about earlier in the conversation, is these jobs in Canada, especially, the EP jobs are rarely advertised. They happen through the network.
Right.
They happen through, the contacts made at the industry events and at the training courses, and through, various different nodes of communication. Generally, if you see a physical posting out there, it's because the network has been exhausted.
Yes.
Or it's because of corporate requirements and things like that. So the network is so critical. So sorry, was that what your question was?
No, that's perfect. No, Justin, that's very well said.
Yeah.
And a testament to that is that when we were looking for some supports, in Alberta, I called you, and then again, because of our network, you were able to introduce me to a great group down there. So I think what you're seeing is completely, exactly like to the point. What is the benefit of the network, right? And again, I'm trying to remember how we met, Justin. I think it was through Mike, who you did some work down here. But again, the key is that our circles now have grown, right? And again, we always help each other when we can, and I think that's a huge piece. For people that are gonna listen to this right now, that saying, I want to start doing the training right now. What? Because I look again. I think it's important here. I never like to reference anything to anyone unless I find true value in it first. And, this is not by any mean like Justin saying, hey, Constantine, can you do this? I'm doing this because I really have spoken to many people and I know you personally, and I know the course. I've gone through it. It is 100% a fantastic, fantastic course. Can you just maybe put some information about Spec VIP of anything that's upcoming? And also, in addition to that, the online tool that you have as well that people can go into as well if they can't make their way down to Edmonton.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a variety of different courses, and I've got a lot of courses that are on our online platform because going back to what we kind of just talked about, that incremental learning is extremely useful if it's done right. So if people are hesitant about online learning because of the fact that they've had negative experiences in the past, or they don't see the value of it, because I'm very much aware of all the negative stuff around online learning. There are benefits to it. The one thing that online learning doesn't allow for is that practical skill set.
Right.
So some of our programs are purely online, but some of them are also hybrid. Now, the benefit of an online program as well is it allows you to take it in at your own time. So if there's something that you are not familiar with, that you need more time on, you have that capability. If there's something that you are very familiar with, guess what? I'm not sitting in your office or in your living room. I'm not going to say don't fast forward it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like but anything you fast forward, you own the risk of missing that value. So,
Okay.
so I'm a big advocator for online learning if it's done right, and if it requires a physical component, if it's done in a hybrid fashion, because it really maximizes the retention and transfer of that content. So, one of the courses that I built several years ago when I was working full-time in executive protection was a course called the Close Protection Site Liaison Program. And it's a hybrid course. So you do about 5 hours of online learning. It's all self-paced. And we go through the fundamentals of close protection in a localized environment. And then we do a 2-day in-person component. And the 2 days is based around people having a bit of a baseline of knowledge already. So we restrict attendance to people from law enforcement, military, and the private security sector because I'm not going to be reteaching fundamental things that you already know. I'm just going to focus on VIP specific ones. So advances, providing that close protection, some physical intervention techniques, arrivals and departures, and then we get through to we actually go through a final exercise where individuals have to do their own risk assessment, they have to do their own operational planning, and then I bring in a VIP and we run them through a full-scale exercise that may or may not have surprises in store for them.
Nice.
And then we finish it all off with a debrief. So that package is really focused on making sure the most valuable skills, the most critical skills are taught in a manner that are easily retained and applied. And a significant amount of the folks that have attended, especially those with robust backgrounds in policing or the military or private security, have taken that and used it to launch their close protection career. So it was never intended to be a executive or close protection full spectrum course, but it gives enough knowledge. I'd suggest 80 to 90% of the fundamentals needed to get you started.
Okay.
And then after that, we can work with you through a gap analysis program. So I've got, I'm not sure when this is going to be released, but we're working on a course in Edmonton, a physical course in Edmonton, in-person one for the May 3rd and 4th. And then I've had so many requests from other cities across Canada that I'm looking at taking it across the nation. So we're
Nice.
looking at Toronto. Looking at Toronto. So
Amazing. Amazing.
Calgary's a little easier for me to get to, but
Yeah.
and Vancouver as well. So hopefully in either late 2025 or early 2026, I'll be able to start putting some of those courses
Okay.
in there. For anybody transitioning from policing, especially, that's the one course I would highly recommend. And you can do the online course right now.
Okay.
So if you take the online course, you can start conceptualizing that knowledge and applying it in your everyday stuff. So when you do hit the in-person course, then you are going to be that much better prepared, and you'll learn different things. The more you've retained elsewhere, the more you will, as new things are presented, they will become you'll become a much more fulsome package. So that's one
Perfect.
program. The other one I have that I highly recommend for folks, especially people transitioning from any public sector job into the private sector, is my executive and close protection career success course. So this is where we go through the nuances of career growth in the industry, ways to network, what your resume should look like. I've just built a presentation on bios that I'm going to add into that, because if you've worked in the public sector, you've probably never written a bio. It's probably the most critical aspect of private sector operations,
Oh, yeah.
having a bio. And so I got the video for that and the training with some samples.
Is that all
And then
online?
I think it's all, yeah,
Okay.
100% online.
Okay.
And I think it's probably about 15, 17 hours
Okay.
of content. So it's pretty robust, and it can be done at your own pace. And you can even, that one's set up so you can skip through. So if you need to know about networking right away,
Yeah.
you can go into the networking component. If you need the resume information, you can go into the resume component. So it's,
Okay.
you could choose your own adventure with that one a little bit. The other ones are all fairly progressive. So those are the two programs that I highly recommend. And then the third one is we built a VIP operations platform several years ago called the VIP Local Asset Network. And that is where we have resources for people in the executive and close protection industry. That's where I run my mentoring and coaching sessions. So every month we have what we call the close protection development group. I build a training video for that group. The members watch it on their own time, and then we get together at a predetermined time to unpack it and discuss it. So the most recent one was on bios. So that's where some of that information is going to come from. The last one we did before that was around vehicle ramming. And so, we had a few incidents over the New Year, New Year's in New Orleans,
Mm-hmm.
and Christmas. And there's a lot of information out there about vehicle ramming. But what I noticed was there's very few people that were taking the vehicle ramming topic and saying, how does this apply to executive protection?
Mm,
So I built that presentation
nice.
and received a ton of great feedback on that. So that's the goal,
Okay.
is we incrementally build people over time. You need a great starting point, like the close protection site liaison course. And then after that, you're your own training manager, your own career manager. I'll help you, guide you through your process, and get you, to where you need to be. But
Amazing.
again, I say this to many people, is I'll
Yeah.
give you the guidance and advice and training that I'm capable of delivering, but you got to put the work in.
That's it.
You got to, wherever you are in your career, 2 to 5 years out of retiring or leaving your agency, you got to show up. You got to show up to the meetings. You got to show up to the training. You got to show up to the conferences. You got to get FaceTime with, industry leaders, decision makers, and people that can open doors to opportunities for you, or at least point you down the direction of the right advice to get,
Mm-hmm.
and then follow the advice.
Yes, absolutely.
That's my
Justin,
suggestion.
no, just I love that. And for those listening, it's spec SPEC specvip.ca. So specvip.ca. This is where you can get all that information. I'll tell you this, Justin. Anyone that comes to our organization, and I can tell you this about many organizations, when someone comes in and says, I have close protection, one of the very first things that I will ask them is, where did you get your training from? And I can tell you right now that we recognize Spec VIP and your programming as a program that if anyone has that on their resume, it just makes us that much more interested in the applicant. Because the end of the day is that a lot of people do get training but that training has not been tried, tested, and it's not really sometimes by any credible resource. And I can tell you this right now, Justin, your stuff is extremely, important to the industry. And I really want to thank you for putting that together and thanking so much today for sharing this. We truly, truly want to see you move down to Toronto so it can be a lot easier for us. So if you can do that. But we definitely got to talk about, when you are coming to Toronto, because we definitely want to push that out.
Well, thank you. And thank you for that, those kind words about the program. I appreciate it. My whole reason for being in this industry and doing what I do is about helping people. And the best way I can do that, I find right now, is empowering protectors to help them accomplish their mission. So I put a pretty significant emphasis on the development of protectors and helping them achieve their goals, because when protectors achieve their goals, our society is that much safer. If we have extremely competent, highly capable protectors all across society, then our communities are that much safer. And I think that's an extremely valuable mission, and I take it pretty seriously, and I enjoy it very much, because protectors are fantastic people. And if we, the protector industry, especially policing community, has taken a lot of negative press lately. I think we've gotten out of some of the worst of it, and we're kind of in a rebuilding phase. And if I can contribute to helping that, then that's really important to me, and I want to do that. So I appreciate those kind words, because you're right. It's not just about taking training; it's about taking the right training.
Right.
I like to think that my training is right. I know there's other great programs out there as well too, but I also know that there are some programs that people should shy away from. That will teach them the wrong things. That the instructors themselves, even just the beliefs they have and the values they demonstrate through the way they instruct, will have a ripple effect into the students, and that will potentially adversely impact their operational capabilities and career success if it's the wrong values and beliefs and way of doing things. So I think it's really important that protectors do their homework and do their own vetting on the training programs that they attend, and if I can help with that, I will, because it's so valuable. Not all training is good training.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm completely in sync with you on that one. Well, Justin, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate your time. I think you've given us a lot of information. And I know you wrote a really, really good article that I had the privilege of being like one of the first draftees to look at it. But when it does come out, look out for that article as well. When it does come out, we can kind of backlink into the episode anyways as well to give it a little bit more extra boosts.
Sounds good. No, I appreciate that. I took a little bit of my own advice with that article. I wrote it and I said, hey, just like when I ask people to review, I suggest people have their resumes reviewed for structure and gap analysis. And like, let me see what I can do with this. I got some great feedback, and now I'm working on just consolidating all the suggestions and putting it out there. And I know we're coming up to close. I just wanted to throw one more piece out there, because it's so important. Everything we've talked about is critical, but once you leave policing, make sure that you are aware of all of the legal requirements of getting into the industry. Because as you talked about, with us being different in Canada than the US, every jurisdiction is different. And in policing in Canada, most jurisdictions that I'm aware of, you cannot hold a security license, but you will need that to work in the private sector in Canada. And so you've got to do that homework. So, just maybe to tie it all up, is start the process as early as possible, preferably 2 to 5 years out. Go through the training, but make sure you do a fulsome assessment of what you're going to need, and then start putting that into practice, because the risk is, by putting it into practice, is like doing the work to get yourself set up for success. You don't necessarily need a security license while you're a police officer, but you do need to know that you need one, where to get it, and what you need to do to get it as soon as you leave. So again, once you retire, you can hit the ground running. All that other stuff, taking training, networking, building online profiles, and developing yourself, all of that can be done before you leave. And ideally, depending on what your agency's policies are. So just make sure you minimize your risk as much as possible, and maximize your potential for when you retire.
Wise words, man. Wise words. Thank you so much, Justin. I appreciate your time today, and we are looking forward to creating new protectors in the coming years. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for joining me in today's podcast. This podcast was created for protectors in the fields of law enforcement, executive protection, security, and anyone looking to level up their mindset. If you are learning from this podcast and you're enjoying it, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at The Sentinel Mindset. That's a zero-cost way to support us. In addition, please subscribe to the podcast both on Spotify and Apple. And on both Spotify and Apple, you can leave us up to a 5-star review. If you have questions for me or comments about the podcast or guests you would like me to consider on The Sentinel Mindset, please post all comments on YouTube. I do read all the comments. Please also check out our sponsors, thearenatoronto.com. The Arena was created to help all those in the fields of law enforcement, security, and all that achieve their fitness goals. I want to thank our producer, Matthew Doyle, and creative support, Jaslene Singh, who help me with this podcast every week. We value your feedback and are here to support you. Tune into the Sentinel Mindset every week, where we look in the mirror to make real changes and explore what it takes to achieve greatness in your craft.
This podcast is brought to you by Executive Protection Lifestyle Canada. Make sure to drop by next week and don't forget to subscribe.